Our dedication to preservation and therefore to keeping things as they are is escalating to a point, and this was a recent discovery, to a point that it now occupies a very serious part of the world. Preservation also happens more and more quickly. It went from a period from kind of 2,000 years to a kind of situation that became shorter and shorter. In 1880 it was still 200 years, then in 1960 it becomes 40 years. We are actually in a kind of situation that the time between building or completing something and deciding to reserve it has been kind of reduced to almost zero. And if that is true, then kind of preservation in the future will become kind of probably something that is not retrospective, not something you decide in retrospect, but something you have to decide in advance. And obviously that is a kind of really very radical transformation of the notion of preservation. It happened to me myself. I finished a house in France, in Bordeaux, about 10 years ago, and kind of before I could look away from it, it was a national monument and therefore declared as something you could change only under kind of very specific conditions. The arguments for preservation are getting more and more vague. It used to be a kind of really almost the language of art history, and we are now in a kind of more social situation, which used to be wardens of civilization, now current and past social expression. So there's a kind of radical shift from kind of precise definition to kind of very open-ended definition. And after these first two laws, we have now a very new, radical new law, a new system, you could say. It's the UNESCO World Heritage Convention from 1972, which is valid for the entire world and which in itself is increasing relentlessly the number of World Heritage sites, either in culture or in nature. And I would say that from a law, it now has become a system that reproduces and produces more and more preservation. Here you see the current quantity of preservation, and you see how it is divided between different continents. Europe has an enormous amount, and then almost as much as all the other continents. So the whole concept of preservation is totally Eurocentric, but that will be corrected in the future because this is what all these institutions together are responsible for declaring preservation in the near future. The quantity will double. So we looked at which parts of the world are currently under some regime of preservation, and we discovered to our own surprise that currently 12% of the entire surface of the world somehow may not be changed anymore. And that is, for me, a very important discovery because it means that although we think at this moment that we are in the middle of modernization and that everything is changing at an ever faster speed, we are actually in a kind of weird situation that part of the world changes very rapidly, but the other part of the world has to be in a kind of permanent stasis. So there's a kind of movement like this, acceleration on the one hand and the opposite of acceleration on the other. And that's a kind of almost entirely untheorized condition. So what does preservation do, and why is there so much preservation and so much world heritage? And actually it's not very difficult to guess, because what you see here is the increase in tourism that occurs after particular sites in these parts of the world are declared World Heritage Site. So what we see more and more is that there is a direct connection between tourism and preservation, and therefore ultimately between tourism, between preservation and the economy. You would think that preservation is to save things from the economy, but actually it becomes more of a kind of single entity. And we are now also entering a moment that preservation is not only a thing that you do with physical entities, whether they're cultural or natural, but also with other elements, so-called intangible heritage that you can not really define in physical terms, so that we are now making plans to preserve folk songs, French cooking, certain folk dancing, storytelling, so that there is an enormous expansion that also will not stop. There's plans to preserve every kind of language known to man, and here you see some of the kind of events and some of the kind of ceremonies, some of the kind of activities that need to be preserved. So we are actually living through a kind of apotheosis of preservation. Unknown, because somehow I bet that if there was dark lighting on the auditorium and I would ask the number of preservationists in the room, it would maybe be a handful. Somehow we don't deal with this world, we think of it as a separate world, but this world is becoming very quickly part of the world.